All right, good evening, everybody. So thank you for coming out on this nice cold January night. I am Mike Jetty, the superintendent, and this is our third community information session relative to reimagining the Griffin Memorial School. And so again, thank you for coming out and participating in it. Joining me up front, we've got Suzanne Angarano, who is working on the project with us, and Kyle Barker, who is the architect of record on the project. And they've got a little bit more information that has sort of evolved through these community information sessions, and just as we've learned more about the project and what we're hoping to bring forward. So they've got some information to share with everyone tonight. So we're still energized by this. We're envisioning that there will be a warrant article or two relative to the Griffin Memorial School project. So as the warrant comes together and you participate in deliberative session and so forth, just be aware that there will be information coming relative to this project, in addition to other projects that the school district's undertaking, with the big one being the Litchfield Middle School project. And so that's sort of the bigger project, because remember, it's a two-part plan to get the middle school buttoned up and finalized so that that is set for the next 40 years, and then to focus on the elementary school a year from now, in terms of getting that reconciled and ready for the next 40 or 80 years. I don't know, it could be more than 40. So, but again, thank you for your interest in this. I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne and to Kyle, and they'll lead us through the activities for the evening. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay through the mask? Yeah, great. Okay. So see some familiar faces, some new faces. So one of the things that we're going to kind of start with this project, or for the presentation tonight, is to give you a little bit of a recap. So we're going to start with some goals, and then the recap and some notable findings. We've been doing a lot of investigation over the last several months, which has led us kind of through a lot of different scenarios to kind of pull out the one that seems to fit right, and that's the most viable based on the evidence that we have collected, but to kind of pull you through that information. And then we're going to kind of look at what's new to this information right now is the scenario that we have landed on and the design concepts that we're developing for that. So the goal for tonight is really an opportunity to share all of this information with you, to get feedback, and that your feedback is valuable in terms of developing the design. And so we definitely want everyone in the community and all of you here to share your thinking and share your feedback on this. So that recap, all of this engagement and investigation that we've been doing over the last several months is to uncover and develop parameters and metrics by which we can kind of measure the project development against. And we started that by developing purpose statement and some guiding principles. So the purpose statement for the project is something that we use as kind of a guidepost to say, okay, this is what we're looking to do, but there are no design elements to this. It doesn't give you the answer, it's giving you what the outcome should be. So for Griffin Memorial School, it's to reimagine Griffin Memorial School in a way that unearths potential and realizes the opportunities for learning, community, and operational and energy performance, so that the current and future aspirations of the Litchfield students and the school district can take root, grow, and thrive. And as we kind of dug a little bit deeper into the specifics of what's important for this effort, 5 guiding principles emerged. And the first one, which is intentionally the first one, is to foster forward-thinking and adaptable indoor and outdoor learning environments. So it is first and foremost for the students. The next guiding principle is that this can be a hub for community and activity resiliency, that it should honor and embody the agricultural, historical, and natural context of Litchfield, be high-performing to most effectively utilize available resources, and that's resources in all of what that word can mean, and to be net zero energy using passive house principles. And so these are the elements that, as we kind of proceed through it, everything that we do, every decision that we make should be based upon these. We've repeated these at every kind of engagement that we've had, and they seem to still ring true. They are a little bit of a living document. If at some point along the road somebody says, hey, this doesn't align with what we want anymore, we're not going to be stuck on that. So we want it to be ring true and really resonate with the entire community. But for now, this is what seems to be resonating and what will guide us through the project. So so first was the visioning, then another recap is the community engagement that we've done thus far. So this is the third of 3 community engagement sessions that we've developed, and then there was also a survey. And some of the things that we learned from this are that there's a couple of hot topics, or the top topics. So one is really about educating students. Another is safety. There's a lot of concerns, and that whatever the Reimagining GMS is that it should address safety. Cost and operation. What happens to the existing GMS if it is not renovated or something as part of the effort? Is this really needed, whatever this is? And that it should be welcoming to the community. And so these are some of the thoughts that we've heard repeatedly. These are some of the kind of diving a little bit deeper into that. So we really want to focus on the students and their education, that school as a community resource is really important to some, but we heard a couple of contrary voices on that. That student and staff safety and health is of top importance, and that it's very important to be efficient and conservative with design and construction cost. That we want to be simple and effective. So this is, again, some of the feedback we've gotten. Simple and effective with design for easy and cost-effective operation and maintenance long-term. And then kind of weighing the options. So if you've kind of looked at some of the past videos or participated in some of the previous sessions, you know that there's 5 scenarios that we've looked at. And a couple of comments that we got at the sessions as well as in the surveys said that do nothing is not really doing nothing because there's still many elements to the existing GMS that need upgrading. So something has to be done. And then kind of weighing out, is renovation feasible? New school, what does that mean? So that's kind of where we are with the community aspect. And this is the next iteration of it. So again, love everyone's feedback. So another aspect that we've kind of dove deeply into is the educational programming efforts. And engaging with the staff and some of the students as well. And this was really to develop kind of what should the Reimagined GMS include in terms of learning opportunities and educational delivery methods. And one of the things that we asked in a survey to all of the educators was that how does teaching and learning occur and what types of spaces are required to support it? So on one hand, you see that there's educational models that are needed, so the top 5, and then the learning environments to support them. And one of the things that this showed us is that there's a shift away from traditional classrooms, which the existing GMS is really designed to support, to promote a multifaceted approach to engaging with learning inclusive of group work, social skills, and creating products to demonstrate learning. We also got from those engagements that it's really about the whole child. So it's not just about one aspect or traditional aspect of just measuring achievements by test taking, but looking at the whole child and how you measure that success. So that can be growth behaviorally and developmentally. That can be well-being in terms of how happy, resilient, and engaged is the child. And then, of course, academic and achievements. So those together is really how Litchfield and GMS measures student success. Another thing that we did was we met with the students in art class, and we got them to all draw, what should a school look like? If you could be an architect, what would your school look like? And we got a wide gamut of responses, and some of the pictures you say, well, how can that be useful? Some of the things that we learned from these students is that their school environment should be playful, it should be functional, it should promote independence, be flexible and adaptable, and create connections. And all of these things are extremely important for developing that whole child. And so ultimately, there's a couple of educational program goals that emerge from this, and this helps take this sort of program that is innate to a school, so classrooms, the gym, cafeteria, and puts them together in a way that is truly Litchfield and GMS and what best supports it. So it's not like we have all these different new spaces, it's just how do we use those spaces most effectively to allow learning to occur in the way that GMS imagines it. So now I'm going to turn over to Kyle to give an update, or not an update, a recap of the needs assessment. the down arrow.
All right, thanks. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. One of the things I wanted to mention, I was talking about with Mike Jetty before the meeting, is that I've created a video that's on YouTube that gets into the building needs assessment in a bit more detail. So if I don't hit what you want tonight, we'll try to get you that link and you can look that up. And or obviously afterwards or during the whole process here, ask questions. So, you know, the building needs I think is really important, because if there aren't needs to the building, then why are we doing this? And I think that the report that we've done on the needs assessment clearly shows that there definitely is a need in this building. So let me show you what that means here. First of all, we didn't just kind of off the cuff come up with these things. These needs are based on codes and standards and other metrics that we use, such as the building codes, the life safety code, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Homeland Security. So there's a lot of data that feeds into this that we then base and compare the existing to. We also looked at the enrollment projections. We don't know exactly how many students you're going to have next year or the year after, but there's a way to try to predict that when we look at historic enrollments and then look at the trends over time. And one of the things that we found that was pretty interesting is that from birth to kindergarten, you're actually gaining about 10 to 15%. And so it shows that even if the birth rates aren't increasing, you're actually gaining more students as people are moving into town. It's a desirable place to live. And then as Suzanne mentioned, we have studied the program to understand how many spaces each and every grade needs and how many students per grade, to make sure that we're not overbuilding, we're building only exactly what you need. So then when we look at the building itself, you know, we're looking at the materials, we're looking at systems to make sure that they're working properly, and comparing that to what the new technologies are. Another a big issue here, and I think some people or most people are probably aware of, is the site. There's a lot of issues on the site. We want to get into that in a minute. So to kind of do an executive summary of what those issues are, the first thing we can look to is to say there are portable classrooms. Those are temporary classrooms. They're not a permanent structure. So we're not including that in our building needs assessment. But right there, it shows you that our biggest deficiency is space. There's not enough room in the building to hold all the students that come to this school. Other spaces, specific spaces like the gymnasium, if we were building this new, the standard would be for something that's about double this size. So the gymnasium and a few other spaces are fairly small compared to what we would want to see them at. The last thing, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's a thing that I kind of coined the term functional obsolescence. So what it means is that a lot of the spaces in this building were designed for something other than what it's being used for currently. The best example of that is the nurse's office. It's in what used to be the junior high shower rooms. So you actually still see the showers in there, or at least the spaces where they used to be. And so these type of spaces, it makes it difficult to perform the activities that are in there now because the space, it wasn't designed for it. And that it's not just the nurses, but it's throughout this building, because this was originally, if I understand it, designed it as a K through 8, and now it's K through 4. So there's a lot of spaces that just aren't being used the way that it was originally designed. As far as the building physical plant itself, we've got issues with the site, with cars and buses. We can look at that in a minute. This building does not have a sprinkler system. Any school over 20,000 square feet is supposed to have one. This is 58,000 square feet without a sprinkler system, so that's a major code deficiency. There's not much insulation in any of these walls. When I'm looking at the original drawings, I don't believe any part of this building there's actually insulation in the walls. So you basically have concrete block and brick, and that's it. So this building is not energy efficient, and that is evident in the energy bills that come in. Lastly, there's the newest parts of this building are mid-1980s. So the newest parts are 40 years old. The oldest parts are 80 years old. So a lot of the materials are simply tired. So to get into a little more specifics, what we've got here is the original building is the two-story piece out front. Then we have early additions that kind of wrap around in a U shape here. And then the 70s and 80s wing, the 80s building was actually, or the 70s building was actually a separate building at first and then connected with this piece in the middle. What's happened by this growing organically over many decades, nothing was really done as a master plan, so therefore it doesn't work together very well. If somebody many years ago had stopped and said, well, wait a minute, let's take a look at like what we're doing now, then I think that they would have designed it differently. What's difficult is then the supervision and just the awkwardness of the way that it lays out is not good for education. Again, what I said about the energy efficiency and those type of things, it's worse in the older additions, but all this building suffers from a lot of the same issues. The site is a really difficult thing to fully understand, but it creates some serious problems. The first thing we see is that the location of the building is nestled tightly to the Route 3A and property lines, and it is also confined by the septic systems in here and other things that are going on. We've also got large areas of wetlands in behind it and over to the side. And what's the problem with this is that, first of all, it's very difficult to rearrange anything as far as the driveways or pedestrian safety in order to make that better, because there's simply not enough room the way this is wedged just in the corner of the property. I think people have heard about some water issues on the site, that there is a high water table. Essentially, the water runs down the hill and kind of ponds up around the building. And because the building is so tight to the property line, there's a ditch that runs down through there that finally makes it to the Merrimack River, but it's overgrown, it's not big enough, it doesn't buffer the water well enough in order to handle it, so the water tends to just fill up on the site, and it's very difficult to get rid of it, and that causes problems with the building. So when we get done excluding all the areas such as the wetlands, the steep slopes that are up here, to get from the lower area where Griffin is to the upper part of the site where Litchfield Middle School is, it's about a 35-foot incline in elevation. And so trying to get any kind of connection between the upper and lower site is pretty much impossible because of the difficulties in getting permits, the difficulties in construction, and the fact that this would basically destroy the whole wetland between. The state probably would not allow it. So what we're left with is very little space for any kind of expansion or new construction on either the upper or lower sites. So the conclusion is, when we looked at the deficiencies, and what we did is we lined them up in a worksheet and assigned a cost to each deficiency, and then totaled that up. The cost total exceeded what the current replacement value of the building is, or 60% of the replacement value of the building. And what's important about that is the State Department of Education has a rule that says if your renovation cost exceeds 60% of the replacement cost of the building, they want to encourage districts to build new, because the state feels that building new is a better investment long-term than a renovation of that magnitude. Smaller renovations are okay, but something that magnitude, they want you to seriously consider. They're not forcing it. They want you to seriously consider new at that point. So at that point, it really started to show us that we need to consider the new option a little bit more seriously. The other thing is that when we look at the, let me go back a second. When we look at this wing of the building, it's single white concrete block. So basically the concrete block you see on the outside is the concrete block you see on the inside with no insulation. And so any water or energy or heat that goes through that just moves through it very fast. So our recommendation is, if you were to do a major renovation, to demolish this section of the building. The other benefit to that is that you'd be able to actually do something better as far as the drainage, because you'd have the room between the building and the property line. So when you demolish that part of the building, you're now having to add more square footage because we're already lacking square footage. And so the total amount of construction would exceed, or would be larger than what was left of the original. So if you're going to build 100% of what you've already got, most of your construction is new construction, it starts to make you wonder, well, you know, we're being limited to where we can build because we're attaching to the existing. Wouldn't it be better to build new at that point? Also, because of the location of through 3A, there's no way to change that if you're doing an addition. You'll still be close to 3A. And lastly, that functional obsolescence that I talked about would not go away. You would still have that. We could reconfigure classrooms to work better than what they currently do, but we could never completely get rid of that functional obsolescence that's been built into this building because of the way that it's organically grown over time. So the next section that we want to get into is our goals as far as energy efficiency for the project, whether it's new or existing. We have set some certain goals. The school district has asked us to try to achieve net zero, and I want to go through what that means for us. Basically, a net zero building, it doesn't mean it doesn't use any energy. It does use energy, but it also produces energy, and the amount of energy that it produces is the same or more than the amount that it uses. So it's a fairly simple concept. A building even energy inefficient like this one could be net zero as long as we added enough solar panels to handle the difference. But the more energy efficient we can make the building, the more efficient the whole system would work together. Why do we want to do this? The reason basically is resilience. And what resilience means is not just saving money, it's also about being independent from the utilities. That currently the school and most of us are very connected to the utilities. If the utility goes down, our power goes down. And so when you've got a storm or something like that, you're dependent on the utility. But by going net zero, we start to become more independent, and it makes the building more resilient. Future costs as well. We don't know what the cost of electricity is going to do in the future. My guess is that it's going to go up. In fact, I just got my bill. I'm in a Unitil customer, and from my bill in December to my bill in January, it went up 25%. It went up from 20 cents a kilowatt hour to 25 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's my pain, and that's a pain that I think that the district could avoid if we really look hard at energy efficiency for this building. So how we do that is we don't look at it a system at a time like we used to do in the past. You know, here we see we're looking at what the cost is for walls, the roof, the floor, the windows. But resiliency really means looking at the whole piece, the whole building as a system. And so we're looking at everything together. If you're adding insulation in the walls or putting in better quality windows, we're also looking at how that affects the mechanical system. And hopefully, if it's more energy efficient, it means we're building smaller, more efficient mechanical systems. So there's trade-offs and opportunities within that view of it. So it's a different view of a design than what we would traditionally do in the past. To give you some specifics on that then, the current GMS has a rating of 84 EUI. EUI is energy use intensity, and it's basically the amount of watts per square foot that a building uses, and we can determine that looking at the historic use of energy in the building. A similar school in New Hampshire, the average for other schools in New Hampshire is 75. So most schools in this state are 10% more energy efficient than Griffin is. If we were to build code compliant, which we would have to, we couldn't do any worse than that. We'd have to go code compliant. That would be an energy intensity unit, or energy intensity of 43, which is almost half reduction in energy use for the building. So just code compliant would do a lot to save money for the district. Our goal is to get it down to an EUI of 19, and that's based on early designs, early energy modeling, that we feel fairly confident we can get down to somewhere in this range, and that would save 77% over what is currently being spent for the school. That last 23% then would be made up for if we were doing net zero with renewable energy such as solar panels. So to show you in a graph, these are the same numbers, but it just shows you just how dramatic the difference is between what Griffin currently is and what it could be in the future. We do recognize, however, that it doesn't come cheap, that there is a cost. To get to net zero, we need to buy the solar panels. We need to add the insulation. So there's a lot of work that has to happen, and it does add cost to the project. But when you look at it over time, the cost is below the line and in the red here, and basically that would be part of the bond. And if the bond is out over 20 years, your highest bond payment is the first one because you're paying level principal. Your interest goes down over time, and so your cost for the bond goes down over time. But your savings, if inflation holds true, which I think we're all experiencing the inflation that's been happening, and like I said, it just hit me with my bills this month, over time, your savings would go up versus what you would have to pay if you didn't do net zero. And so the net should be pretty much a zero difference within the first few years. Certainly after the life of the bond, you are in definite positive territory. And once the bond is paid off, that savings is above and beyond, you know, what anything that you've paid into it. So our theory, our hope, and what our goal is to achieve a point where you're spending extra on the building is a good investment in the future to save the district a lot of money over many years. I just signed a contract to double the solar power on my roof, and so I firmly believe this is a good option. So with that, back to Suzanne.
So we would just want to take a little break here and pause and see if there's any questions for the recap. So if it's new information, if you have any questions, or if you're hearing it for the second or third time, if it sounded any different this time in terms of understanding it. Yes?
I have a question, and just to clarify, I'm speaking as a resident, not on any committee that I might be here also for. I don't know. You mentioned on the first slide, it's Rebecca, right? Suzanne, sorry. You mentioned, Suzanne, on the first slide that net zero using passive housing principles was the fifth guiding principle. What does passive housing principles actually mean?
So in the slide that Kyle showed, and you saw that thermos. So passive house is a standard of construction that makes it as tight and energy efficient in terms of the envelope and the construction of the building. So that is a method to help us achieve net zero. So it's not the end all be all. It is a way to help us get to net zero.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. This building houses about 400 students. Is that about right? About 450, I think. Four? When you include the increasing population, we're right around 445. All right, so about 445 students. Is the vision for the school, I've heard kind of back and forth on this, is it K through 5 or K through 4? And what's the square footage requirements of the new building?
Yeah, so the enrollment projections that I talked about, we studied that pretty intensely. And what's interesting is that 15 years ago, when there were bond votes on a new school, those enrollment projections showed it being much higher, and now we've seen it coming down. What I'm seeing, what my research is showing, is that the amount of students is going to level off to about 100 students per grade per year. And it's going to be flat for a long period of time. So if you build it to that level, this should be good for a long time. When you look at the middle school, so I took the middle school and sort of backwards engineered it to figure out how many students it could fit, and it could comfortably hold the 5 through 8 that it currently has for as far as we can see in the future. So it seemed to make no sense to bring the 5th grade back because they're comfortable at the middle school, and they will be. And so that helps us keep the size of the building down and more affordable.
Aren't there currently portables at the middle school as well, though? No, they're gone? Okay. But we have had to expand into portables.
In the past, yeah.
I mean, isn't it feasible to think that we would have to do that?
So what's happening with the enrollments, if you're a geek like me and you look up the census and look back 20 years, you start to understand that the baby boom generation was a huge impact on the population. And if you look at a population pyramid, what you see is the baby boom generation is much larger than any other generation since then. So you've got the baby boomers, and then 20 years later, 25 years later, the baby boomer children, the millennials. That's the second biggest. The kids that are coming through the schools right now are the children of the people in between. So a smaller amount of people is producing a smaller amount of children. As soon as the millennials get around to actually having kids, then you're going to see the population come up a little bit more. But it's like throwing a rock in a quiet pond. Big splash, and then the next ripple's a little bit lower, the next ripple's a little bit lower until it completely flattens out again. That's what's happening with the population. That's why we're so confident that it'll last for a long time at this size.
I just, in my own,
I'm going to ask you,
I would
yeah.
tend to think that you would pull the 5th grade out of LMS and include it in that, K through 5. That way you do have that room to expand, and LMS isn't a problem for sure. You're 100% sure that it won't be a problem.
So we should be talking to the mic just because of the TV. So could you repeat that question again? Because that was a question.
Yeah, so to me, it just seems like it would make more sense to pull that 5th grade class out of LMS, so you only have 3 classes of enrollment, and put that into a new school. That way, you're 100% confident that moving forward, you're going to have adequate space for, I understand you don't want empty space, but at the same time, room to expand seems like, more common sense, but.
Yeah, sure. And more space is always better, but again, we're trying to be very judicious about the money that we're spending of the district. And when we looked at the enrollments and it doesn't show the need, it seemed to make more sense to keep them the way it is. Also, what's nice about the current split is you've got about a 4-grade elementary school, a 4-grade middle school, and a 4-grade high school. Transitions for kids are difficult, and so by keeping it fairly even, you allow the students to feel more comfortable and more confident in the place that they're at.
I think one other key point is if you look at the project that we're proposing this year for LMS, so the locker rooms at LMS are completely wasted space, right? So they were designed in the mid-'80s, kind of traditional locker room space, showers, gang showers, etc. Students today do not use that. They will not shower. Nobody's taking gang showers any longer. Like, back in my day, we got herded in to take a shower after PE class. That just doesn't happen. So what you have is thousands of square feet of wasted space in those locker rooms. And the proposal that we have will renovate those locker rooms into 2 classrooms. So that's adding 2 classrooms at LMS. We currently can accommodate exactly the population we have. We did not need the portables, so they have disappeared. And if we can capture that into 2 usable classrooms, I feel confident that the 4 grades that we have there will be set. And then the other piece is when you're talking about a project of this magnitude, we're talking millions of dollars. And so, if you add 4 classes or 5 classes per grade, that's millions of dollars that you're adding on to the project. So we're trying to be responsible in the way we look at it all to say, what's the current real estate that we have? How do we capitalize and use the current real estate and then build exactly the school we need? And that's where Kyle And I'll tell you, he can tell you, I push back on the numbers because you look at it and it's like, well, wait a minute, there's a new development going in over there. But when you really study these numbers, families just aren't as big any longer, and the children are not in the families, and so the numbers that we have and the projections we have actually held true almost to the student. You know, we had a year ago projections, and we were off by 3 students using the model. So it's pretty darn accurate, and Kyle's been around and has done this for quite a bit. So I just want to make sure you understood that the LMS project is sort of tied into the work that we're doing here too.
Usually as architects, we're criticized for overbuilding, so thank you for bringing up the subject.
Dr. Jetty, are there any other districts that have a K through 4 setup with 5th being in middle school?
Sorry, we have to keep using this to make sure the public hears us. So when you look at configurations across the state, there's all sorts of configurations. There are K-8 configurations. You know, part of this project, we also took a look at Campbell and said, could we have 8th grade at Campbell? Could we have 7th and 8th grade at Campbell? But there's pros and cons and pluses and minuses that go with all of that. So we really have looked at all the configurations. But our configuration is not, it's not unique to just Litchfield. So having a PK4 school, and then, you know, if you take a look in Bedford, for example, they have a 5-6 school, and then they have a 7-8 school. So they have sort of our elementary model, followed by the 5-6, 7-8 in 2 different locations, and then a 9-12 high school. So it really does vary from place to place.
Yeah, thank you. You know, being a parent of now a 6th grader and being connected to a lot of parents of now 6th graders and having the experience of the shift between 4th and 5th, granted, it was in a COVID year, right? And that didn't help anybody. What I can say is the transition from 4th into 5th is not easy. Right, and there's a lot of debate and talk about students. If we're talking about the well-being of students, are they better suited in that remaining year in an elementary building setting for their continued development as being opposed to thrown into a middle school environment? I don't know the answer to that, but I know it's a concern of a lot of parents.
And to answer that concern, that was last year when they went to the portables. So then they were in sort of a self-contained location on the middle school campus, but accessing in and out everything. I mean, literally, if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to go inside the building. That was not the way to do it. There's a reason why we got rid of the portables, right? So, and now having the 5th graders in their own space within the middle school, I'm hoping that current 5th grade parents would say that provides a better experience than what was done with the 5th grade out in the portables. It was not ideal.
Just want to give my other, just 2 cents here. It just seems to me like, yes, there is increased cost to, you know, include 5th graders into this project. I just would hate to see 10 years down the road having another discussion that we need a bigger LMS. That's my only thing. Yeah, it's kind of like what we're going with like the fire station / police station. You know, well, we probably should have done it all together. So.
One little comment on that, and Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the school, in terms of the design of classroom counts, is per what we just talked about, but the shared spaces like the gym and the cafeteria are sized for a greater number of students. So I think we're about 600 for those services. So if we needed to add on classrooms, so another thing is that when we look at the design, we want it to be adaptable. So not like what happened here, so that there's a little bit of a master plan associated with it. So if you needed to kind of add on another grouping of 5 classrooms, it would be easier to do, and it would still be served well by the rest of the building.
Just a point of clarification on the last slide that you had. I don't know if you could pull that back up real quick. I was just curious if what you're saying is, does the blue line represent an anticipated tax impact, or is that just that's just for particularly to the school and the cost of like recovery?
If it's a tax impact, it's a savings. It would reduce your taxes. So anything above the line is savings. The savings isn't really money in your pocket. It's you're avoiding paying the cost. But if you didn't go net zero, you would be spending more. Does that answer your question?
So it's safe to assume that there is
it, in lowering it, in lowering the taxes. Any other questions? Sorry, that's why we're here.
So what is the actual cost of the solar array system? And the reason why I ask is, you know, I'm a bit conflicted between the guiding principle, which I'm not sure I agree with, of being net zero using passive housing principles, and then the following page of community thought, where it said be conservative with design and construction costs, right? Conservative with construction costs in a solar array, they don't jive. So I'm trying to figure out where the balance is and what's the actual cost of the system.
Yeah, sure. We don't know the actual cost because we don't actually have a design. We're roughly targeting a building that's like 80,000 square feet, but you know, we haven't actually started to design things yet. Suzanne will show you a little bit more of that in a bit. As far as the costs go, though, two things I can say. One is, if anybody's been in the grocery store lately, the inflation is kind of out of sight. And so if we were to give you a cost today, by the time that we actually build it 2 years or even 3 years from now, the cost is going to be completely different. So it's very difficult for us to come up with a cost to answer that. The second thing, though, is that I can tell you from personal experience, like I said, I put on solar panels on my roof back in 2010, and I calculated what those created for energy, what my savings was, and what they cost, and I basically came to a break even this year. So I decided to add more. So I'm doubling the size of the system. It's going to cost me, the cost to construct, of putting them on was $20,000. I'm getting a $5,000 rebate from the federal government. If I add my past system and this system, what it's generating, I can pay that off in 8 years. And so if you're taking a short-term view of return on investment, like I want my money back in 3 years, well, no, it doesn't pay back. But if you take a long term, I'm going to be in my house for the next 20 years. If it pays back in 8 years, I'm making gravy for the next 12. So it's the same thing for the district. And I don't think that you're planning on selling the building until anytime soon, right? So if you're going to hold on to this building for the next, Mike was saying earlier, 50 or 80 years, anything past like 5 years is gravy. And so it's very much in the district's interest to look at these systems. I can't, it will definitely pay off within the 20-year bond. So I think that's important. We're thinking that the payback is going to be much shorter than that, but we can't give you a figure until we've actually got a design and we can start to look at real prices, not guesstimates that are 2 or 3 years out. Is there a payback on the work that's being done at GM?
That's why I'm thinking with the solar array for LMS.
So that's an investment of 910,000 is what we'll end up paying back on that. And I can't remember exactly when that flips to be positive. Dave, do you know how many years out that?
I don't remember the timing on that.
What? I think it was less than that, Andrew. I think it was year 13. But I think year 13 is when it goes into the positive and it's gravy at that stage. But that's using current modeling. So you take a look at what's happening with energy costs and then or electric costs, and then you look at what's happening with oil prices. All of those things are what kind of keep it up in the air because, just today, the news isn't very good, right? And so as these things shift and change on us, it's going to make it so that payback period is faster. I can tell you, just experience in a previous district, switched over to a biomass project. The payback period was predicted to be 8 years, and it became 4 when the price of oil went over $100 a gallon or a barrel. And so as soon as that occurred, the district was able to get into the payback period, and then it was all gravy from that point on. So it really did pay off there.
Well, there's a difference between if this were a new building and LMS, because LMS was built in the 80s, and so it does not have the same EUI that we're trying to predict here. And so with a better quality building, then any solar panels that are added, that payback's going to be shorter.
So for example, at LMS, there's a air gap that exists all along the roof, okay? If you were to take all that and turn it into a hole in the wall, it would be 26 feet by 26 feet. That's how big the hole in the wall is at LMS. We're going to close that off. That's going to produce savings. What we can't do is, or I guess we could do, right, is add more insulation and so forth to that single width of concrete brick that exists in this building, right? So, you know, you can take measures to sort of button up the project at LMS. Here, you're just talking about construction that is what it is. That I believe we're saying that the concrete here is actually what you see on the other side of it. So that's a problem. It's something that has to be addressed. So again, comparing one to the other is a little bit of a misnomer, right?
Any other questions? We do have sure, we do have a little bit more of the presentation to go.
So, you know, I think, you know, in speaking about LMS, right, and in GMS thinking, I think there's this general concept of needs versus wants. And from, you know, it would be nice to see options, right, put forth to the taxpayer. You know, what does a plan look like without this system, right? What is a plan with this system? And get the community input and for them to decide. Because I fear that if we go forward with a warrant and it's the big bang approach, it might not get passed, right? And the objective of everyone, you know, I'm thinking that's certainly presenting tonight is to get it passed, right? And so what is it going to take? And so I think having options will only help you.
You're absolutely right, and we got to take that to heart. And you know, adding the solar panels doesn't have to happen, but we could still do the passive house that would save you money in the long run. So there are definitely options, and I think that as we go forward, one of the things that I was going to talk about at the end is the schedule. You know, there's a vote coming up. Our intent is to try to get to submit for state building aid. That's a tough one to get, so no promises there, but that's a goal to get the design done enough to do that. Then the rest of 2022 would be putting together more detailed plans that come up with hard construction costs going into a bond vote in March 2023. So that's when we start developing those numbers. As we're doing that, we would still want to get input from the community, and that might be an appropriate time to start to look at the details and say, okay, your cost per square foot here versus over here, let's look at some value engineering and trying to get down to a number that we think is going to pass.
And just on the need versus want thing, I mean, the reality is whatever school we build, we need to heat it. We need to provide electricity. We need to have lights, right? So those are all needs that we have. Choosing to go and to put our tax dollars invested into the building itself and generating it locally versus choosing to be tied to fossil fuels and then the market volatility that goes along with the fossil fuel market, especially when you're a big consumer like us. You know, homeowners know what it's like when the oil delivery guy comes and you're paying that bill. We've got a tank many times that size, so it's even more volatility that we're subjected to, right? And the same thing with the electricity. You know, our meter is spinning faster and, you know, keeping track of more electrons coming across it. And so, you know, the more we can get away from those volatility pieces and become dependent, it's a wise investment for our taxpayers. So we're going to spend energy dollars. That's the bottom line. You got to heat the place. You got to light the place. Can we spend our energy dollars smartly? Right now, we're literally letting our energy dollars go out through the wall. That's not smart. So, you know, if we can design this and do it in a way that gets us independent and gets us out of that fluctuation, we feel that that's the responsible thing, and that's what we've asked this team to do for us.
Stay tuned as we go through it and help us get to that design.
Thank you. So great discussion. And next bit of the presentation is also somewhat of a recap, but just I'll kind of keep you in looking at how we ended up where the end of the presentation is going. So we've looked at 5 scenarios. So at the first community session, we had the scenarios, and we wanted to, you know, hear from you all. What are the pros and cons of each? At the second session, we kind of looked at what we heard, looked at if we had any additional things to add, and also added things from there that are from the other assessment pieces. So the data that we collected, how does that shake out in terms of pros and cons for each of them? So the big picture ideas that we had were do nothing, renovation and addition, build a new on the existing lower site, the current one here, but just a little bit further back, build new on the upper site near LMS, which was actually what the original intent was, and then another one was new building somewhere else in Litchfield. So we were looking at all 5 of these scenarios to just be able to have those pros and cons, to weigh them against each other, and to make sure that we were looking at a variety of options and not just stuck on one. And so as we kind of looked at all of those pros and cons, I'm going to kind of quickly run through some of them. So for the do nothing option, some of the pros are that it helps maintain that sort of connection in terms of its current location and the history there in the 1930s building, and it's less upfront cost. However, the cons, that list is a lot longer in terms of educational value, safety, with the highway right up against the site, community feedback. A lot of that's really not an option. So I'm kind of summarizing here, but you can see that the cons were a little bit heavily weighted on this do nothing option. On the renovation and addition option, we were very intrigued with this idea. There's a lot you can do in terms of design to upgrade an existing building for new educational models. And we were excited by that potential. But, however, some of the educational value of what that could deliver was outweighed by some of the other negativity on the educational aspects. So the site, in terms of cons, the site is still pretty constrained. We couldn't really do much in terms of outdoor programming, which is one of the program aspects that was on the top of the list for the educators. And it's also very disruptive to education to do construction during, right next to or during school hours. And because it's renovation and addition, that means that the construction timeline would be much longer, so you kind of double that disruption. And there's a couple of the aspects that are concerns that you just can't fix with this option in terms of the location, the constraints on the site, and just based on what we know from the building assessment, that there are some aspects of this building that, to the community at least, seems unsalvageable. So we could do our best, but there's still going to be issues that you can't solve without way more money. So in terms of pros, there are some things that are good about keeping the existing structure, keeping its existing location, but again, the pros are outweighed a lot by the cons. The next scenario is building new on this existing lower site. So it would be a little bit further back, and so here you can see the list gets a little bit leans towards the pros. So with a new construction, you can fix a lot of those issues because it's new construction. Educational value is high. You still kind of keep some of that similar location and historical context. But on the con side, there's still the issue of the site itself. It has a lot of constraints. There is construction disruption to learning. And then you're kind of doing a flip-flop with then, okay, well, where does the playfield go? And that sort of thing. So looking at those options, okay, that maybe has some viability to it. Then new building on upper site. This is the one, again, that we were originally tasked to look at. Based on the site assessment, it was determined that that's really difficult to do. We would be very constrained up at that site. It would be a little crowded with LMS, so if you were to need to add on to either one of those schools, you're very confined by the ability to do so up there. Another big one was that having all of that traffic in and out of that same entry point would not be feasible. But then there's a lot of added cost. There's damage to natural habitat. There's a neighborhood directly behind the school. So how do you get that other access road out? And looking at that might be a con that really outweighs the pros on this one. And finally, new building somewhere else in Litchfield. So this was not originally on anybody's mind when this project was first started and we were looking at this. And as we kind of looked at the first 4 options, none of them seemed to really do it in terms of viability. The pros and cons the cons outweighed the pros. And when we looked at this option, it seemed to kind of become more and more viable, and especially compared to the other options. So this ultimately has been where the project is going, and it's really based on eliminating things based on their viability. And so we've been able to determine that this might be the most viable option. And there are still a couple of cons in terms of, okay, what happens to the existing GMS? And then the new site is still yet to be determined. But it was a process of elimination, and some of those cons that you just can't really get over is something that has really driven this project to look at option 5 the most closely, and that the benefits of the pros far outweigh the cons. So based on that quick kind of summary of where we've come, I'm going to pause again. So quickly, oh, I'm in front of that. I apologize. Let me go over here. At a community meeting last time, we asked everyone to kind of look at what pros and cons can we add, what are the top pros and cons of each, how does each scenario accomplish the guiding principles or not, and how could each scenario be improved to address the guiding principles better. And it really was kind of a consensus by that community group that we had last time that option 5 as well was the way to go. So again, this was a process of elimination. It's where the project is going and what you'll see in the remainder of the presentation. And that's the way that we're looking to define design as we move forward and define the details, as Kyle was talking about, for the design moving forward. So again, I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions, comments, any new thinking on the pros and cons for this, an opportunity to share at this time on the scenarios.
Look, I mean, the only comment I'll make is you need to figure out where, which I know hasn't been identified.
Yeah, the only comment I'll make is you need to figure out where and what parcels of land are available for the school to acquire with 15 to maybe 20 acres of land, right? And then also considering the fact that your location will drive your efficiency of the building itself. Okay, so.
That was going to be my question. Do you have a ballpark on a land acreage that you would need to build an 80,000 square foot school?
Yeah, the state sets it at a minimum of 5 acres plus 1 acre for every 100 students. So we'd need a minimum of buildable land of about 10 acres. So something, 15-ish would be ideal. Exactly. So even, yeah, and when you saw the map of the GMS LMS site, it's a big property, but when you subtract out all the wetlands, the steep slopes and everything else like that, there really wasn't that much buildable left. What about easements? Yeah, if there was a power line. Well, so bottom line is, again, it's what works. The state has that rule, but they grant waivers fairly easily. What they want to see is a design that works. I worked on the Florence Rideout School in Wilton. It sits on a 2.5 acre property, and it's the same size building as far as students. It's 450 students. But there's a town-owned playfield in the front that adds another 5 acres to it. So it's still small, but it's an urban school right in the center of town. It works really well for them. And so once we showed the plan to the state, they were like, yeah, we'll give you a waiver. So it really depends on the site. So is it fair to say that there are some options available, but that is still yet to come as far as a decision?
Yeah, and I think it's really important that everybody recognize that the idea of, we did not enter into this, and you could ask Kyle and Suzanne, the first conversation was building a school somewhere near LMS, right? So we're like, we already own this land, how do we do this? And the more we dug into it, the more we realized that actually, we're lucky that the town said no last time, because you would have had a big school on a bad site. And so we want to come at this the right way and build the right school that's rightly sized in the right location. So, we came late to the game of trying to find a piece of land. We've gone through the town. We're looking at all sorts of options. It's a sensitive thing. I don't want to sit here and say this is what we have our eye on, because I think you can understand the sensitivity to land purchase or land acquisition, but we are going after it as fast as we can. There are some general goals. You've got to find a site that's going to work, a site that's going to accomplish the goals that we've outlined. It's large enough. And we've also looked at the reality of the way Litchfield has evolved as a town. So originally, I think Griffin is located here along the river because this is where the town was located. 3A was sort of the way that you got from one end of town to the other, or from Nashua to Manchester. And a lot of the older homes are along this corridor, but that's not the current center of town. You know, anybody who looks at the way the town is laid out, you know that by busing, just busing to Griffin, we're causing increased costs because we have to come all the way over here, right? And I say all the way over, it's 3 miles wide, but do that over and over again for 180 days or 12 years of a child's education, or I guess the 4 years that you're here, you are increasing that. So we're trying to find something that's a little bit more central and what will meet our needs. I hinted earlier at warrants. I'm just going to go there for a second. So I was on the phone with the attorneys yesterday and today because land acquisition is something the voters have to approve. And so we're trying to figure out what can we get in front of the voters this year so that we don't have to wait a year out on a land purchase, right? So we're trying to figure out if there's a way that we can come up with a warrant article that will allow the voters to support and then come back with something at some point in the next year so that we can do this. So it's really kind of touchy, but what we don't have is a purchase and sale signed that says this is where we envision the piece of property for the school. So we're trying to find a way to navigate all of this. Vague, specific, I'm not sure how I was with that, but understand we're working really fast. We didn't see this one coming, so.
You're vaguely specific. I wanted to point out something you kind of touched on was that, Suzanne and I were hired to produce a design for a K-5 school next to LMS. And so where we've ended up has been a process that has caused some heartburn for the committee and the SAU and the school board, but I think that it was all for a good cause, that we've come up with a plan that is a little bit smaller, that is hopefully will end up being located in a better location. So the consensus from the whole group has been really positive, but it took a little struggle to get there. So this wasn't just a one step, we come up with this. It's been a whole process, and I think that's what this presentation has sort of been about. Any other questions on it? Because this is a big issue of where is the school going to go. Any other questions about that, or just comments about the consensus that a new school is the right way to go? Do you folks all agree with that comment that we got?
I think that one thing that's interesting to consider is probably when we were thinking about the school up on the LMS site. We had that recent issue where the schools had to be evacuated really quickly for the safety concern. And it actually panics me to think about if the elementary school had been up there with that one little road. So I think that that's something that could be added to the cons and drives that need for a new site for the school.
Thank you for that. Yeah, there's a lot of other things that are on there, just like playfield space for the LMS is pretty limited. But if we put another school up there, it'd be even worse.
My question is, what could be done to this property? I'm all in favor of moving the school off this road. But legally, can we sell this land afterwards? Is it bound because it was donated? So we could actually possibly recoup some of the cost?
I think we've looked into that.
Yeah, so we've been asked that question before because I guess the original 1930s building that was donated land. So we have in the file at the SAU office, it was an attorney who did a deed search back in 1985. So they must have been looking at the question at that point because it's a very detailed legal opinion, and what it says is that the Litchfield School District owns this property outright with no restrictions, and we have the ability to do whatever we need to do. So there is no, it reverts back to somebody if it's no longer a school or any such clause of that. So we do have that legal opinion on file. There's no need to update that. If it was true in 1985, it's true in whatever year we're in, 2022.
So the existing building does have value to it. It's maybe not as valuable as a school, but it could be valuable as a community center or something for the town, or if it were sold to a private developer and improved, then the value of that goes on the tax rolls, and you've got income from property taxes for this building. Any other questions? Any comments? Support? Pro? Cons? All right, we'll finish up here.
Okay. So, with option 5 kind of being the consensus where we're moving forward, we wanted to take a look at what is the potential for that, and how do all of the guiding principles become realized. And we've taken a stab at that a little bit, and again, the purpose statement is really kind of that star that is guiding us through this, and then the guiding principles are the individual things that we're looking at achieving. And then we also wanted to look at the program. So yes, we have the classrooms and pre-K, kindergarten through 4th. There's also the specials, pretty typical programming in terms of what is needed to function in a school. So we've kind of taken our preliminary look at the program, and that's something as we move on through design, we take a closer look at. We want to know the details of all of these items to make sure that they are designed properly. But in terms of the educational programming and engagement piece, we kind of have a sense of how these will go together to best serve the students. And we've also gotten comments on how can the facility also be something that welcomes community and is multi-use for community members as well. So with that in mind, we start with designing a bubble diagram. So this is something to kind of see, okay, how can these spaces be grouped together? What's the flow throughout the building? What's the experience in terms of how things are located next to each other or far away from each other to best support learning, to best support functionality, and that whole child experience. And so with those things in mind, I'm going to show 4 different experiences, and I'm calling them experiences intentionally in the sense that because we don't have a design, because we haven't done that detailed look at the programming yet, we have some big metrics. We know it's about 80,000 square feet. We have our net zero and passive house principles in terms that kind of lead us along in terms of orientation, that classrooms typically want to go on the north for diffused light. We want something that's welcoming in the front. So we have some of these elements that start crafting what that school potentially would look like, but we don't have the design yet. And that experience is really based on what we've heard in terms of how do teachers teach, how do students learn, how does the community interact with each other and with the school, and what can that possibly look like. So I'm starting with the front porch. This is something that came up several times in our discussions with the educators and with the administration in terms of it being contextual to Litchfield, to feeling like it's part of the landscape, part of the historic context, and also very welcoming. So your front porch is where you kind of hang out with, and you can see your neighbors and have that interaction and that dynamic energy. And the front porch that you have now, I don't think necessarily speaks to those. And so we're trying to provide something that meets all of the functionality aspects to this and is within the context of the program, but gives you something that is that welcoming front porch. And so we imagine something, and there's a potential for this where in the morning you drop off your students, the buses drop them off, it is safe. The walkways kind of funnel students in a way that there's clear differentiation where traffic flows go, and they're dropped off. There's some soft grass, kind of play around in there, sit on the bench for a little while. And then there's that long covered front porch, so if it's raining or snowing, you can quickly get out of the weather, and you're welcomed into a school that has some transparency along the front, and it is clear that this is a welcoming and community-based school. At the end of the day, when students are let out of the school, there's opportunity to kind of play and stay a little while. It's not just a asphalt parking lot that the students are exit out of the school to. And it creates something that the building is alive beyond the hours that it functions as a school. So another thing, the second guiding principle is to provide a space that provides community resilience. And we heard a lot of feedback that it'd be great if this space could be something that community can use after hours, that they feel welcome to, that, for instance, this gym is kind of the bottom of the list if you want a space to hold an event in, and how can we create a space that exists because it is required for the functionality of the school, but also supports some of those visions. And the potential there, so these are the images of the cafeteria and the gym, and we started thinking about, okay, so those are two spaces that are large, but they could be larger if they were next to each other and potentially opened up to one another. And that's something where it's multi-use for stage performances, large venues, book sales, community events, all, weekend and evening events, those types of things, and multifunctional. So during the day, students have those clear spaces, the gym space, the cafeteria space. It's very obvious that those function as such. They're open to the exterior in terms of the cafeteria. Maybe there's a garden out front, an agricultural teaching opportunity there, and there's that connection to the exterior. In the gym, again, it functions well. It's the size properly. So this gym currently is undersized, and then functions for all of the games and community events. But then in the evening, potentially it opens up and it provides more multi-purpose functionality to that space and can support the entire community. And we imagine that this is a way to take the need of the gym space and the cafeteria space and do more with it and provide more opportunities. The next type of space that came up a lot during our educator surveys and engagements with the administration and staff is that students need a space that provides collaboration space, but also kind of breakout for if there's a moment to one-on-one with a student and teacher, if there's computer time, if there's tutoring, testing time, those types of spaces. And we were looking at, okay, so if there's a space, you have a neighborhood of the one grade that all of those students can kind of interact and the teachers can interact as well, what could that potentially look like? So currently, some of those pull-out spaces are in the hallway with the desk. It's not necessarily the most inducive for learning opportunities there, kind of distractions all around, and it's not within the community of that grade. So we imagine something that all of the classrooms kind of group around and create this community, this neighborhood for that grade, and that there's a zone in the middle where they can provide, where they are provided with multiple different scenarios for a full class, two classes together on those steps. Maybe there's a nook on the side where that's the pull-out space for student one-on-one. Computer tables, touchscreen, TV screen potentially to display or for learning opportunity. And then kind of having all of those resources housed together, but in a way that kind of supports throughout the day, that changes throughout the day, and that all of the students feel like they're still within their zone. This is their safe zone. And as that kind of changes throughout the day, here's what that might look like with two classes out on those story steps, engaging on the whiteboard there. And then another aspect to this is, okay, that's the collaboration space for within that neighborhood, within that grade. But what if there's other classes that want to come together and there's other functions? So maybe there's a teaching kitchen opportunity or something that you need a larger space and you bring multiple classes together. And the potential for that to be something that's a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more flexible in terms of furniture and the way that it's interacted with. And this could be a space that's large. Maybe we explore looking at a partition that kind of can divide the space in half so that it can function as one size of a classroom, or maybe it's double. Having clear views to the outside, lots of storage space in terms of keeping the resources for that type of lesson close at hand but organized. You can see there the kitchen island off to the side. Maybe there's a teaching kitchen opportunity. Multiple screens, so one teacher could be on one screen, another teacher on the other, and they're kind of co-teaching that class curriculum piece. And so furniture that's flexible. You can also sit on the floor. The students have that ability to sit and learn in the way that is best for them. And that flexibility, that variability is what students really need in these types of flexible spaces. You know, how that might change throughout the day and the opportunities that that type of space can provide. So these views are four that we feel kind of capture a lot of the things that we heard in terms of what's needed in the Reimagining GMS and what we believe that with option 5, a new school somewhere else in Litchfield can achieve. So we can meet the 5 guiding principles, and we believe that this is kind of the start of that, what that potential design would look like. And like we, as Kyle mentioned, that kind of some of the next steps is to dive deeper into exactly what does that look like and developing that further. So that's kind of brought us to the end of the presentation, but I'd love, does everyone have a handout? If you didn't receive one, there's some over there. And so I'd like some feedback on the views that you just saw. So the first exercise at the top is what we call headlines exercise. And this is when that school opens, when the reimagined new elementary school is opened, and there's a newspaper article that talks about what that was, how that, you know, how it felt on that first day of school. What does that newspaper headline say? Yes.
This is the easiest question tonight. It has to say, thank you, Litchfield voters. It has to.
It's a great one, yes. So you can write them down. If give you a couple of minutes to do that. I can share, ask for some volunteers. Otherwise, I'll be collecting those sheets of paper. And then the second box at the bottom is, you know, do you have any general reactions? What works well about the design? What doesn't work well about the design that you've seen so far? And do you believe that they, from what you can see in those designs, again, it's not fully designed, does it start to respond to those guiding principles? Does it meet those guiding principles? So please take a few minutes, fill out those questions. We'll get some feedback, and then we'll open it up for more questions. How's everyone doing on the worksheet? Okay, I'd love some volunteers to share, you know, all of their responses or one main comment that they have.
So for a headline, I said, "Free asbestos. Visit the Litchfield Town dump."
Any volunteers to share what they wrote down? Can somebody give us a little bit on, in terms of the views that you saw? Does it seem to respond to the guiding principles? Does it work well, not work well? Part of this is that, yes, that is something that we are showing based on what we've heard so far, but it is not designed yet. We still have over a year worth of design in order to do this, and this is based on your feedback. So we'd really like your feedback. Just because it looks like that now doesn't mean that it can't change. So we want to know feedback so that it really resonates with your community and what you all are looking for.
I really like the green area as you come into the entrance. I really find a lot of value in that because, you know, you drop the kids off, after the weekend, they can catch up with their friends. Maybe they throw the football around out there. It's just, I don't know. I really, really value that.
I like the energy efficiency. Relocating it off of Route 3A is a huge win. And the mixed learning between classes, I think, would be beneficial.
Thank you. Other feedback?
Yeah, sorry. How are you thinking through safety, right? I mean, one of the observations that I had is, man, I see a lot of glass. And right, as a concerned parent in the world that we live in, how are we thinking about that?
Great question. So a lot of things, you want to balance that a little bit. Of course, safety, yes, is important, but that doesn't mean you want no windows. So natural light views is very important for learning, and so it's how we use it, where we use it. So one of the things, first and foremost, is a secure vestibule, so creating that as part of the design. So any visitor that comes, they have to kind of check in through there. They're not just allowed to enter and roam around. And then also there are methods to what type of glass is used. We can explore options for bulletproof glass. There's other things like that. I don't think technically we can say bulletproof, but bullet resistant. And there's, is it visibility into the school that's the safety concern? Is it intruder? Is that the concern? So getting more into the detail on what is the safety concern with the glass would help us to then respond in the best way, while also optimizing that we want daylighting and views for students. Anything else?
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I thought, when I was listening to the presentation that, at the front entrance, it's very transparent. Maybe being transparent at the front entrance isn't such a good idea. Maybe that's something we should look at more carefully. What happens with an active shooter oftentimes is that if they're angry at the school district, they'll come in the front door all angry. But they don't think to go around the school so much. It's the front entrance. So what Suzanne was just saying about making sure that front entrance is secure, that's something that maybe we should, look harder on and make sure that that's done properly. So thanks for that.
With that much glass, how does that affect efficiency? I know you do get some trade-off. You get some natural light in and some,
It's the amount too. When we look at the whole building, we're trying to target about 20%, I think it is, of glazing. So, we'll minimize northern exposure because you're not getting that southern solar gain. Vice versa, we're also seeing that the heating loads in the summertime or in the shoulder months are actually pretty significant. And if the school is used in the summertime, we want to reduce the amount of solar gain. So there's a lot of that we're trying to look into, and that would definitely be balanced out in the end. You had a question over here?
I just wanted to say that I also noted all the glass because I am like a safety freak. Those are the things that just go through my brain constantly. But I think for me, I'd rather there be more windows, more ways out, because you have somebody coming in one way, but then to have like the more ways that you could get out of the school seems safer to me. So that's where my paranoid brain goes.
With respect to security, there are, I think the state put forth like some guidelines, and then I'm sure there's like federal guidelines too. When it comes to that aspect of design, do you bring in other people who are, focus solely on security, or is that something that you guys do yourselves? Like, how does that work?
We've done this a lot, and yeah, the Homeland Security put together a joint task force that produced a report in 2018. A lot of what that focused on, first of all, was actually training. That's a big thing. But as far as the design goes, that front entrance piece is huge. And the visibility is a big topic in that. And a lot of schools that I've worked on, they've put in shades, and the shades are drawn so that way, if there is an active shooter, they can't see into the rooms. But even that's been changing in the last couple of years. It went from hide to fight and flight. And so we're keeping up with this. And as the world progresses, we're trying to keep up with the latest changes. It's sad to think that there's a school shooting in the United States almost every month. But that's the reality that we've got.
I just want to sign in because the last thing I want to do is have us build a prison, right? So we want to make sure that we're designing a building that, you know, the risk is so minimal. It really is. You see the news, it's horrific when something happens, but we should be designing a school that exudes joy and has children, you know, really energized in their classrooms. And I think we can do that. Site location is a key thing because the longer you can see if there's somebody who's coming, right? So you can do things with the site that will allow you to sort of take care of some of these aspects. And the other piece, and just all the training that I've been to, you know, the Secret Service put out a great report, well, a great report of school shootings, right? But basically the summary was that in the vast majority of these, the actor, the bad actor, was a known bad actor. And it was really just a matter of, did you prevent that bad actor from taking the bad action? So, you know, at the high school, that's why we build relationships, because you want to know if there's somebody who's upset and you can head it off before it ever turns into something. So I think, you know, there's the physical aspect of the way we design it, but we want it to be warm, light, welcoming, and then we just need to keep our communication going so that if somebody is disgruntled, that you're able to predict that, right? So there's no perfect answer to it, though.
I noticed in your renderings that there were, it looked to be mainly a one-story building throughout. Is that kind of like the end goal, or is that dependent on the building envelope?
The intent, it'll most likely be 2 stories where the classrooms are, and then 1 story elsewhere, but the gym and cafeteria are usually higher spaces. So and then also that entry front porch view is intentionally scaled at the front to be contextual to the community and at a sort of a neighborhood scale rather than a large institutional look. So that what you saw there, it indeed is 2 stories behind, but architecturally we can design for it to look more like 1 story, more approachable, more welcoming, and to fit with the context.
You picked up on exactly what we're trying to achieve. Not to beleaguer a point, but going back to the security for a second, what Mike said about, it's not just the visibility in, but the visibility out. And so if you've got a front office that has good visibility of the parking lot and the entrance, Dan, how well can you see the parking lot from your office? If you go to any one of the schools that I've designed where with a front entrance, the principal can see the parking lot. That's what our goal would be. Anybody else? What's next? Yeah, so I kind of already went through this, but we'll just go through it quickly again. That deliberative session and voting comes up here quickly, and it sounds like there's going to be some discussion at that meeting as to what some of the next steps are, including the land and what our roles are going to be. The intent is to try to get an application to the state for state building aid. Again, it's a very competitive system right now. What the state has done is that they've rearranged how they fund school building projects back in about 15 years ago, everybody got something when they submitted. But then the moratorium happened and nobody was getting anything for about 10 years. 2 years ago, they reinstituted state building aid, but they made it competitive. Out of 20, I believe 3 districts that submitted this past round, 3 got funded. So there was 20 that didn't get funded. Some of those might try again in this next round. I know that some of them decided just to go out on their own, but a lot, are not doing anything as well. There are many more districts that are looking to apply. I believe the state has a list, and it's about 50 districts. It's a lot that are interested. Some of these are very small projects. Some of these are very, very large projects. The way that the money is distributed is based on financial need of the district, the building needs of the district, and then a bunch of other categories below that. The main topic is life safety code issues. And so when you look at some of the other districts that are going forward that have some pretty major life safety code issues, it's looking very difficult for Litchfield to gain some of that state building aid. So that's just the reality of the situation as far as the funding goes. We wouldn't know what the ranking is until about December of 2022. So the application's due in June. We would know by the end of December where Litchfield ranks. In that interim, we would be designing to get to a point where we could hire a construction manager who would put a guaranteed maximum price to the project. So by the end of December, you'd have a design, you'd have a cost, and you would know what the disposition of state building aid is. And then the warrant articles would be written for deliberative session and then voting in March of 2023. If things were successful, then construction could start fairly quickly after that. With the building being delivered, what did we just say? Probably, it would be more than 12 months after that. So we're talking, fall of 2024 would be the earliest, possibly mid-year of, or into 2025 before you'd have a school that's ready to be occupied. So that's sort of the schedule moving forward so that everybody understands. It takes a long time to deliver a school building project. So I think we're...
Yeah, so at the bottom there, you'll see an email address as well. If you have additional questions, comments that you want to contribute, please. It's litchfieldschoolimprovements@litchfieldsd.org. Otherwise, any other comments or questions? Thank you very much.
Just to reiterate this point on the warrant, 2 years ago, we asked the voters to fund toward the project, right? And so we had $70,000 that voters supported. Last year, we asked for $100,000, and the voters supported that. So, we're sort of doing a test of the voters, right? Are you interested in us pursuing this project? And twice, voters have weighed in, yes, we are. We understand there's a need. This year, we're asking for $125,000, which will continue our work, right? So this is the third ask, and we're hoping to have that voter support. And then, as I hinted at earlier, there could be an additional warrant article relative to land acquisition. Our deadline to get that posted is next Monday. We have a board meeting tomorrow night. We are down to the wire on how to do this. But if we don't have something that's there, the reality is we have to wait a year to even ask about the land, and that's going to really tie our hands when you look at the rest of this timeline. So we're working with our attorneys as quickly as possible to try to have something, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'll hopefully know more by tomorrow night's board meeting. But please understand, we didn't see this coming. If we had seen it coming, we would have planned for it. But now we are doing our best to get something out there. So I'm going to thank Kyle and Suzanne for all the great work that they've done. We've had 3 really good sessions, a lot of information here. This will be posted on YouTube so that people are able to watch at home later. Encourage your neighbors to take a look at these. These are all there. And then the Reimagining GMS website, which is accessible from our school district website, that's where all the information is being posted. So there's one for the LMS project and there's one for the GMS project. And I just encourage people to take a look there because we're putting all the information that we can. So thank you for coming out tonight. We appreciate your interest. We'll be around. If you have questions, you can catch us at the end. But thanks again for everything tonight. And I just wrapped it up. Are you good? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So thank you.